All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning, or I guess early afternoon for those on the East Coast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. We're going to get started this morning talking about global navigation in SharePoint and diving into a little bit about our product called Masthead. This is part one of three of a web part series that we're putting on with some of our great partners. We'll be kicking off this morning as Masthead, talking about how to navigate. Peter Carson at Extranet User Manager is going to pick up in a couple of weeks talking about how to manage your SharePoint environment, and we'll tie into some of that this morning as well. And last but not least, Ty Graf will be talking about the analytics side of things, and with the three parts you'll be seeing really covers off three of the most fundamental and important aspects of having a successful SharePoint portal. So yeah, we're here this morning, number one. Number two will be September 18th, and the third part of this webinar series is September 20th. And Peter will be jumping in right at the very end this morning to kind of give a little preview of what you'll be seeing in the next part of the webinar. Before I get started, just want to talk a little bit about the format. I will be speaking probably for about 45 minutes is my aim here. I'll save about 10 minutes for questions at the end. If you have questions throughout, feel free to pop them into the question chat box as part of the webinar. And my colleague Karen over here will be watching for those. And if they make sense to bring up throughout the webinar, if it's timely, we'll bring them up. If not, we'll address them at the end. And we'll make sure we save time for that. And as I said, Peter will join us for the last couple minutes. My name's Alton McCauley. I'm the managing consultant at IT Groove Studios. We are a consulting services and product development company located in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, out on the West Coast. We specialize in supporting the whole range of Office 365 services from a consulting standpoint. And then we also, on the development side, build custom solutions for our clients. And we also take a software as a service approach to trying to fill in some of the gaps that we see in the Microsoft Cloud space. And Masthead is the product we have on the market right now. Like any good IT company in Canada, our main office is out of a hockey arena here in Victoria, and we also have a second newer space out in Brentwood Bay for those that know the Victoria region. It's our 15th year of operation this year, and as I said, we're very proud to introduce Masthead, and we'll be primarily throughout the webinar focusing on SharePoint navigation itself, and then towards the end we'll get into a bit of a demo of the product and what it has to offer. So jumping right in, I wanted to focus first and foremost talking about the importance of navigation in SharePoint and just go through a bit of a keynote on why does it matter, why it's important, and how, especially in the world of modern SharePoint and SharePoint Online, what are the considerations that you need to be looking after. So really, really simple question to start. Why does navigation matter? For us as consultants, we come into many organizations to do a whole array of SharePoint implementation projects. A very common way that we get brought in is, hey, we have this SharePoint portal, we rolled it out and nobody's using it. And a lot of our jobs often as consultants is to take a look at why adoption isn't there or where the implementation went off the rails, that kind of thing. Time and time again, as we look at that, we see that a primary reason why people aren't using the SharePoint portal is because they don't understand it and they can't find what they're looking for. And when I say they don't understand it, it's not that they don't understand SharePoint or how to use SharePoint. It's that they don't understand how to see the different pieces that SharePoint are fit together. SharePoint's a massive product. It's got a ton of functionality. Even in the modern versions where Microsoft has been more and more relentless at kind of bringing SharePoint down to its core functionality, there's still a lot that it does, and there's still a lot of building blocks that make it up. A lot of those building blocks we have to consider as an administrator, but there's still a lot of that that's exposed to the end user. If I'm a user in the HR department and I don't know how to get to my HR team site besides typing the URL into my browser, I'm not going to think of going there frequently. As Microsoft has moved into modern SharePoint and in SharePoint Online with the tight integration with Windows 10 and Office 2016, that battle is getting easier and easier. If you architect your sites properly, which we'll talk about, and Peter will talk about more in his webinar, that distinction for the user becomes more straightforward. But people still crave seeing a SharePoint portal or any online portal as that typical hierarchy tree view that we're used to. Something at the top, a level that sits beneath it, a level beneath that, and they want to be able to drill down and find things. And that's where SharePoint out of the box doesn't necessarily give us that functionality. You have a lot of power to navigate within sites. You don't have a lot of power to navigate across those sites and make up your SharePoint portal. We'll get into some examples of this and some visuals as we walk through here. But fundamentally, when we create our SharePoint portal, if we're doing things properly, we're architecting out many, many different sites. As Microsoft has moved into modern SharePoint and SharePoint Online, although subsites aren't deprecated, we'll talk about that further into the presentation, Microsoft is really encouraging us to create top-level sites for all our sites. And there's reasons for that we'll get into. What you'll wind up, though, is a very large set of disparate sites that aren't necessarily connected in any way. And that's the challenge that we're trying to solve here. How do we let our user make their way through that? And in lots of ways with navigation, we have to lie to our users. We have to create that sense of hierarchy, that sense of drill down, that sense of relationships that they're looking for, even though SharePoint from an architectural standpoint doesn't necessarily give us that. And that's what we'll get into this morning, how we do that and why it's important. Going back to where I started from a consulting standpoint, so many projects we've come into by simply redoing navigation, by simply adding some user experience and some navigatability to the sites, we've taken adoption from a very low place to a place where it's permeating throughout the organization. And there's nothing else that changed from a SharePoint standpoint other than bringing in navigation, bringing in some user experience, and giving it a focus to the governance aspects. Far too often as technologists, as IT people, as administrators, we get hung up in the how of the technology, how does it work, how are we going to implement this from a technical standpoint, and forget that at the end of the day, our users have to be able to navigate through this. Microsoft has done a phenomenal job in the more recent iterations of SharePoint of bringing in really powerful user experience, UX and UI design that matches what people are used to in the other web tools that they use compared to some of the old classic SharePoint experiences that some of us might still have nightmares about. But even with that sort of modern UX experience, even with that approach to a relentless look at how the end user is going to use the product, there's still the missing gap of how does the user navigate through the portal. And when we talk about that piece, what we're really talking about is site navigation versus global navigation. And we'll get into to this sort of topic throughout the presentation, but I want to make the distinction right up front. Out of the box, SharePoint has a ton of site navigation, and we'll look at different examples. You've got top navigation and left navigation in modern. In classic, you had quick launch and the site nav. Those concepts all give the user powerful ability to navigate within their SharePoint site. And it works quite well, whether you're using the managed metadata-driven navigation, whether you're using, as I said, the sort of more quick launch or site nav functionality that SharePoint has in Classic. You can have a great experience and very easily create navigation for your user to drive through the site. But what we're talking about here is that next level up. It's how the users navigate between sites and how can they visualize the overall portal. The question I get a lot from people is why hasn't Microsoft addressed this and what's to say that they're not going to? And the answer to this is that Microsoft focuses their SharePoint functionality on the clients that they deal with most closely, which are the very, very, very large clients, the 50,000 person Fortune 500 company. That global navigation would be an aspect that would be dealt with more on an in-house and sort of, let's call it, section of the portal level. There's no way that with 50,000 people, you might have an intranet that spans the whole organization, but you're not going to have a SharePoint portal that necessarily spans across the way we're talking about here. And that's where in the sort of mid to large size organization, that gap is still there to fill. We still need to be able to bring in that global navigatability that doesn't exist out of the box in SharePoint. And the way that Microsoft envisions some of the AI tools and the AI-driven navigation, which we'll look at, is very powerful, but doesn't necessarily fill the challenge that we're looking at here. I just want to do a level set before we get started because I'm not sure where everybody's coming into this webinar at. I wanted to just make sure that we're all comfortable with the term modern SharePoint and what it means. If you're in SharePoint Online, you've probably seen the new modern experiences rolling out that look like this. This is the team site, and I'll show you a communication site in 1 second. The modern experiences are pretty much a full front-end rewrite of the SharePoint product. It's still SharePoint behind the scenes, still SharePoint under the hood, but what Microsoft has done is actually rewritten the front end, and there's been some fundamental technical shifts. We won't belabor that too much here, but they've gone from server-side rendering to client-side rendering using React.js, and they've brought in sort of a more modern web development approach to the product. But it's not a new version of SharePoint. It's not, the next version. It is simply a new user experience put on front of the product. Classic experiences in SharePoint Online, which we'll take a look at in 1 second, are not deprecated. They still exist, but Microsoft is really sort of making the push down that modern path. And there's some considerations you have to give to it around how your user experience is going to work, how your customizations are going to carry across. We're not going to get too deeply into that this morning. We have some other presentations on our blog that talk about that. We're really going to focus on the navigation concept of these sites. And just to introduce it, sort of the idea, the black bar that you're seeing across the top here, this is the Masthead product, the global navigation, and the navigation beneath, which we'll talk about as we go through this presentation, is the hub site and then site navigation. That's the team site look. This is the communication site look in modern SharePoint, the team site designed for collaboration, tying in with Office 365 groups, and the modern sites, the communication site, sorry, more designed for an intranet, or let's call it the replacement of publishing in modern. And then I think we're all familiar in some form with the classic SharePoint. This is the 2016 iteration. There's obviously 2013 and probably 2010. All follow that same kind of classic trajectory. So out of the box navigation in modern SharePoint, and I'll touch base on where this ties in with classic too, but we've got hub site navigation. We'll talk about hub sites quite in depth in a second here in the presentation. We'll talk about the site navigation. You've got top or left navigation, and then we have this global navigation consideration that we're going to focus on this morning. So taking a look at what that translates to, just looking at that same site that we were looking at before here, we've got the sweep bar across the top. We're not going to talk too much about that. That's just coming out of Office 365, but it is the sort of topmost aspect of your navigation in your SharePoint site. On the left-hand side here, if you don't have the update pushed out to you yet, it's coming very soon because it is general availability. Microsoft's made one change. You used to have the Office 365 logo here. Now, instead of having your custom logo in the center like you did before, your custom logo now sits on the left-hand side. So important to give some consideration to that. If you don't have a custom logo in your Office 365 portal, you do that through the admin center. And with Microsoft's change, it actually gives you a really nice, powerful ability to kind of brand all of Office 365. Sitting beneath that, we have Masthead. Beneath that, we have our hub site navigation. Well, as I said, we'll define and talk about hub sites quite a bit shortly. And then in this case, we have the top navigation turned on, and this is for our site nav right here. And then flipping that for a team site with the left-hand navigation, same thing, sweep bar, Masthead, hub site, and the site nav on the left. One thing, I just want to highlight two sort of changes here for those who've been working with this for a while. It's in preview right now, but soon to be general availability. Currently, the way it's set up, you have the ability, when you create a team site, you always get left-hand navigation, and when you create a communication site, you always get the top navigation that I was showing before on this slide here, the sort of across the top style. What they've introduced is the ability to actually choose which way you want your navigation regardless of what site you start with. So even if you have a communication site, you can have left-hand navigation, which is great for us sort of in some of the portal development work that we do. The other change is this is an older screenshot, and the screenshot I showed on a previous slide, you'll notice the banner went all the way across. That's a very recent change that's being rolled out right now, that the left-hand navigation now only goes to the bottom of the banner, and the banner comes all the way left, based on some feedback that they got that it was really confusing where this all sat. So two announcements that sort of came out more recently from Microsoft. Taking a step back and sort of thinking about this from a governance perspective and from an architecture perspective, there's really three kind of key considerations we have to make when we're planning out a SharePoint portal from a navigation perspective and from an end user findability perspective. There's navigation, which is what we're talking about primarily here, which is how people are going to find the content they're looking for. And usually that comes into play. We have to think about things like how many clicks is it going to take for you to find something? How do people think about their content? How are they going to want to be able to drill down through it? And then how do people need to work during their day? How does it make sense to structure your navigation so that people can dig down and find what they're looking for? That's going to be your primary consideration and what we're going to spend the most time on this morning. But there's two other very important considerations too. There's where it sits technically. So from a site architecture perspective, how are you actually structuring your content? Peter will talk more about this in his section of the webinar in a couple weeks, or sorry, next week. But we need to give consideration to the architectural blocks that we create, the sites that we create. That's what drives things like permissioning. That's what's going to drive things like backup and restore, site provisioning, your analytics, your AI, your technical functionality. That's going to be driven out of the architecture. If we have fantastic navigation, beautiful navigation, that works great when you're using SharePoint through the browser. But more and more and more users are interacting with SharePoint through Teams, through Office 2016, through Files on Demand, through the SharePoint app on their phone. And if the site architecture is not done properly, it's going to be really, really confusing to them. It might be all well and good for you to say, I'm sticking with subsites. You can't claw them out of my hands. I'm going to create one SharePoint site. I'm going to put everything in subsites. Okay, fine, makes it easy for you from an administrative perspective, but when that user opens up the SharePoint app, they're just gonna see the one site that you've created and they're not gonna be able to access those subsites. Same in Office 2016, when they go to use the nice shiny backstage view where you can pick your sites and save to, when they go to file an attachment in Outlook, they're not gonna be able to see the sites they expect. So those building blocks are really critical for making sure that content is broken out in a way that makes sense to users, not just to you as an administrator, so that when they start to interact with SharePoint in different ways, that power is going to be there for them. We have clients, especially in larger organizations, who I guarantee you have no idea they're using SharePoint. They may know that they go to their browser for their intranet, but for working with their files from a day-to-day perspective, they're just using Office 2016 and Files on Demand through their Explorer. They have no idea that what they're touching there is SharePoint, but because it's architected properly for them, they don't need to care. And the last piece of that is an actual taxonomy. We won't get into information management taxonomy too much right now, but this is along the lines of how do people search for it? How do they refine what they're looking for? How do people see related content? And how can records management and proper archival policies be placed on top of your content? That's equally as important to all this. It's a complete separate topic, but that translates down to how do you structure your metadata, your basic content types. Definitely less is more in this space. How do you balance users being able to work quickly and collaboratively and not tagging documents constantly with still getting the information that you need about the documents. The way I see it is this ties down to basically navigation is how people are going to find it today. If I'm working on a project for my organization and I'm trying to find a file that we're working on, I'm going to navigate to that project through my navigation, maybe through a project hub that we have set up, and I'm going to navigate to the site because I'm thinking about that document today in the context of this project. Site collection architecture, as we talked about, that's how it's stored. Information management is how people are going to find it 5 years from now. When I know that this document exists, but I forget what project it was produced as part of, or when I'm looking for something that I don't necessarily know the source of, that's when the information management piece comes in really key. When we talk about this from a governance standpoint, it's important to remember that navigation is the easiest thing to change. I can go in and edit my navigation, especially if you're using something like Masthead that gives you a visual editor. I can change that navigation on the fly and readjust it, reorganize it in a snap. Changing the site collection architecture, the information management taxonomy, those are things you need to get right from the start because they're very, very hard to change later on. So for example, we work with a lot of organizations where they go through constant departmental reorgs as different management comes in and the organization shifts and moves. We try to approach that from a site collection architecture perspective, being that the site should tie back to functional units. No matter how many times the organization reorgs, they still have to do payroll. They still have to have employee management. They still have to have finance. You want to build those sites around those key parts of your organization and then use navigation to represent it in the structure that makes sense today. Flip side of that token though, although navigation is the easiest to change, it is also the hardest from a perspective of is also the most impactful to end users. If you're constantly changing your navigation on people, people are going to get really frustrated really quickly. So it's a very powerful tool to be used sparingly and responsibly. I wanted to touch quickly on Office 365 groups and where they fit because the question comes up a lot. I think at this point everybody should be clear that we're talking in SharePoint Online, sorry, here specifically in Office 365, a team site behind the scenes is always tied to an Office 365 group. It has a one-to-one architectural layer. We won't belabor this conversation. We could spend an entire presentation just talking about this. I want to just cite this before I go on, because I definitely stole this graphic, but I use it because I love it. It's from a fantastic site called I Can SharePoint, and a blog post called Everyday Guide to Office 365 Groups. We'll share this deck, and the link is right there for you. I just want to get that right out in the open first off. The concept of Office 365 Groups is that every product that Microsoft has in Office 365 has some sort of collaboration and storage space. In SharePoint, those are sites. In Outlook, those are shared mailboxes. In Planner, those are plans. In Teams, those are teams. The concept behind 365 Groups is that Microsoft needed a way to unify those collaboration and storage spaces across all the products. They needed an architectural element to Office 365 that transcended any one product, because without that, you just have silos across every single product. So what they came up with was this concept of 365 groups. There are some bumps and bangs to get started with it, as they sort of learned the right balance of how much of this to expose to the end user versus how much to keep behind the scenes. But I think they've got it in a really good place right now. Suffice to say, for the context of this presentation, that you need to remember that as you're creating your team sites, you are creating your groups behind the scenes. Often what we're encountering right now is that the order of operations of onboarding in Office 365 usually start with Microsoft Exchange and then move on to SharePoint as kind of the next one to go. And by nature of that, because SharePoint's the first one in the collab and productivity space that you're making use of, the sites that you're creating here are actually creating the groups behind the scenes. They don't actually exist yet. What's really, really important is to take a step back and think about how this group architecture is going to work across Office 365, not just in SharePoint. If you do this properly and you, like we talked about in the previous slide, set up your site architecture properly so that you're setting up a good group structure behind the scenes, you're empowering the Office 365 rollout to keep going beyond just SharePoint. When a user now wants to use Planner, they can go in, and because the groups are set up, they're going to see those same groups that they're used to in SharePoint within Planner. When Microsoft Teams comes online, you'll be able to convert those groups into Teams, and there'll be a direct linkage between the SharePoint site and the team. So when content's being uploaded to Teams, it's going right into your SharePoint site, et cetera, with Power BI, beyond, all the tools. If that's done properly, you can think about it once and forget about it. Two big benefits to that. You've got linkage. All roads lead back to SharePoint in Office 365. When you store a document in Planner, in Teams, that document, if done properly, is going back to SharePoint. The other side of it is permissioning. If the groups are done properly, I should be able to onboard a new user, add them to the right Office 365 groups, and now they have access to the right SharePoint sites, to the right tools in 365, to the right Microsoft Teams. This translates back to your desktop experience. Microsoft Office is group aware. That's how it sees the world, and if your group's done right, you'll be able to see them there. This doesn't directly pertain to navigation as we're talking about it today, but it really does, because this is what empowers your navigation experience across the Office 365 platform. And it's really important to give it the consideration and time that it's due. Moving on from there, oops, oh no, there's some animation, I'm sorry. We are gonna talk about, oh my, it's still going, okay. We're gonna talk about what are hub sites, because they do really factor in this architecture that we've talked about. What I've talked about so far with this concept of creating Office 365 groups, with creating all your sort of functional units as sites, inevitably you are going to wind up with hundreds, if not thousands of sites, depending on the size of your organization, and that's okay. I can tell you from in the field consulting experience, I've never gone into an organization or looked at a project that we've done and said, man, we've created far too many groups and sites here. But I can tell you constantly, I've regretted going, oh, I wish we had split this out into 2 or 3 different sites instead of making it one site. So always err on that side of creating more sites than you think are going to be necessary. And that's where hub sites come in, because without it, I've just got a whole bunch of unrelated architectural building blocks scattered across the table. With hub sites, I can start to put them together. I can start to create some kind of hierarchy within that. So at the end of the day, hub sites group closely related sites. The concept is that you promote a site to become a hub site, and then you can attach other sites to it. At the end of the day, that's as complicated as it is. I have a site that I declare as the hub, and then I can attach my other sites to that hub. By attaching them, I now create that relationship. I create the fact that they're closely related. There's UI implications to that around some navigation that we'll look at, around some web parts that light up, around some UX that Microsoft's created for you. From a programmatic sense, if you're doing custom development in your SharePoint portal, you now have that in the property bag. You know where that site's associated to. It lets you bind related assets. It sort of helps you sort of store the assets properly. When we say assets, we're talking about files there, and present common activity, and that's to do with some of the web part functionality Microsoft has given. When you look at the top level hub site, you're going to see news. If you've used the SharePoint news feature, you're going to see news throughout the hub site. You're going to see events from all the sites on the hub site. You're going to see site activity, which is that really nice AI-driven, delve-driven web part that shows you what people have touched recently. That's going to light up across the hub site. We use these in a couple different ways. One limitation that exists right now that if I was a betting man, I'd say Microsoft is probably going to be changing pretty quick here, is that you can create 50 hub sites in an organization. Now, that might sound like a lot, but if you've got 50,000 people in your organization or 100,000 people plus, that's not very much whatsoever. We usually use them in a few ways. We use them to create, for example, an intranet hub site, which is going to be a grouping of communication sites. We might create a hub site called the project hub, where we group all our project sites together. And then we often create a hub per division that helps us group the functional and departmental team sites together. So in organization, maybe at the division level, we've got finance and people management. That would become the hub site, and then maybe there's 100 team sites that sit beneath that get joined up to that hub. And we'll talk about in the demo here how to create hub sites and how to work with them. When you join them to the hub, though, you also light up some custom navigation. So basically you get four things when you create a hub site. You get cross-site navigation, you get content roll-up, common theme, and scope search. I'll talk about scope search quickly. I'll sort of work from 4 to 1 there. Scope search just means that you, in the search result set, when you search in the hub, you can choose to search across the hub site. Common theme, whole other presentation, but very powerful to be able to apply in the modern experiences. A consistent user experience from colors, fonts, all those kind of things across the hub. Content rollup is about bringing the SharePoint news, bringing the site activity, bringing the events up to the top of the hub, and then cross-site navigation. In those screenshots that I showed you in earlier slides, I pointed out the hub site nav to you. That's what this is. When you create a hub site, you get an additional bar of navigation that exists across all the hub site, all the sites in the hub to be able to navigate between them. And you can manage those links, which I'll show you in a second. One thing I want to highlight here, though, is that this is not global navigation. The question I get all the time, both as a consultant and in the Masthead world, is, well, why don't we just use a hub site for global navigation? And technically you could. If you attach all your sites in your SharePoint portal to one hub site, yes, that navigation will span across all your sites. However, architecturally, that is really not what hub sites are designed for and not what we want to do. If you're sub 10 people, sub 5 people, sub 20 people, go for it. It probably makes a lot of sense. If you're more than that, though, that is not what hub sites are meant to be. They are meant to group sites together to be able to use to divide up and create a logical structure to your portal from an architectural standpoint, not just to create global navigation across them. We make use of both layers of navigation. Masthead lets you navigate globally across everything. The hub site navigation, as I said, if it's the division, it lets you navigate to the departments. If we're using it in a program site context, in a project hub context, it lets you navigate to the different programs within the project management organization. For an intranet, it's the intranet nav. So these things play nicely together. They're not mutually exclusive, and that's definitely been our experience with them thus far. Just to give you an example of how this might be used, in sort of a very simplistic SharePoint portal, we have in our Studios demo portal, we have something called the Studio, which is our intranet. We have something called Teams, and something called Projects. These are hub sites up here. These are all individual sites that we've joined up to the hub site. I'm going to go do a little demo right now and show you how you can actually go through this process that we talked about of actually creating a hub site. So I'm going to go ahead and open up and create a new site collection. So I'm in the modern SharePoint administrative portal here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new site collection to work with, and I'm going to use the communication site template to do so. Sorry, wrong place there. And I'm going to go ahead and choose that communication site. I'm going to give it a name. And I'm going to go ahead and spin it up. If you haven't used the new SharePoint admin center yet, it's called Preview in the portal, but it's definitely GA and ready for use. You can go ahead and find that site now. So I'm going to open up the modern communication site. It's just out of the box right now. It's completely net new, and we're going to go ahead and change the theme of this site first to give it some custom colors so that you can see when we create the hub what's going to happen. We'll make it that dark blue theme there. It'll be really obvious to use. So I'm going to go into PowerShell now, and we're going to actually run some PowerShell commands to transform this hub site into transform this communication site into a hub site itself. I'm not going to choose to update Visual Studio Code. I'll just copy this little snippet of PowerShell here, and I need to authenticate into our developer portal to go ahead and run this. So I've created an SPO session for the SharePoint Online management shell. And what I just went ahead and did there is ran that PowerShell to convert that site that we created before into an actual hub site. So, sorry, actually, I apologize. That first part, I connected to SharePoint Online. I apologize. Created the session, and now we're going to go ahead and register this as a hub site. There are a few parameters that I can set here. I'm going to leave things pretty straightforward and standard at this point. But what I can do here, and what the power of this is, I can actually choose what users have permission to join sites to this hub. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and choose an Azure Active Directory security group, or just an Active Directory security group as well, and put it in here. And basically, it would then restrict the users who can join sites to the hub to those users. So for example, maybe only managers within my department are allowed to actually join sites to the hub site. And okay, so we've gone ahead there and ran that, and now we've got the output showing us that the site has been made into a hub site. When I refresh the site now, you'll see a couple key changes to user experience. We've got the hub site navigation going across the top, where we can add links to it. One important thing to note is that you have to add links to your hub sites manually. This is not an automatic navigation like we used to have in classic SharePoint, where by joining things to the hub, you would get new links. You actually have to go in and manually, like I'm doing here, add those links to the hub site navigation and then save them. But it is global, so I can manage the navigation at the top level of my site, and by doing that, I will have the navigation across all the sites that I join to my hub site. There is definitely an aspect of search-driven to the hub sites for those who've worked with search-driven content before in SharePoint. There will be some delays in that navigation pushing out to the sites in the hub, or some of the other things we'll show you, like the roll-ups. They definitely are search-driven, so there's that consideration. I'm going to go ahead and create another SharePoint site here, which is going to be a SharePoint team site. And what I'm going to do is show you how this can be attached to the hub site. So right now I'm just creating this team site, going back to what we talked about before, and you just saw it there, it said group management. That team site created an Office 365 group behind the scenes. Now when I navigate to it, we rolled the dice and it got the pink theme. What I'm going to do is go into site information. Because I have a hub site in my organization, this hub site association shows up, and now I can connect it to that demo hub, or that hub demo, sorry, that I created in the first step here. And by saving this, you'll see what's going to happen. The theme is going to apply, so we'll lose all the white and pink, and we're going to get the blue. The hub site navigation is going to show up across the top, and this site is now part of that hub site and can be used as such. when I talked about governance before, I was talking about how you can control who can join to the hub. So it's who can perform that action that I just took. And just one thing to point out too, sorry, is that you can only edit the navigation from the top level hub site. You can't edit the navigation from the sites that are joined to it itself. So this is different than a subsite that we used to have before. This is actually fundamentally joining sites together. It is, the site is not moved beneath the site. It's not nested within or anything like that. You'll notice now when I edit the SharePoint News web part at the top of the hub, I can choose to show news from all sites in the hub, or actually even select sites within the hub, which is kind of cool. So if you've got a certain subset of sites you want to show news from rolled up to the top, you can do that here. And they have a new hub news layout, which is really cool as well. Oh, I'm very sorry. There you go. There we go. So that's how we could create the hub site and join the site to it. What we didn't show too much there is the ability to use the search scope features, which are actually quite powerful. Do search across the hub sites, as well as go in and look at the site activity across the hub sites. Just not an easy thing to demo because of some of the crawl delays that we talked about, but that's the concept behind the hub sites. What I'm going to show now is we are going to jump into the global nav part and talk specifically about Masthead. Talk about how we can use the product to solve some of the challenges that we've talked about this morning. So the first place that I'm going to start here is I'm going to start in our Masthead installer. And what this lets you do is fundamentally in the product, I've shown you the output, I've shown you where the Masthead sits on the sites, but we need the ability to actually turn it on and off for certain sites in our organization. So that's what the installer does, is that it lets you go in and choose what sites you want to have Masthead enabled on. And you'll see there, I just turned it on onto a site, refreshed, and now that navigation is showing up across the top. So there's sort of two key parts to it. The installer part, which I just showed, is how you can turn it on and off. In a second here, we'll dive into the Masthead editor to actually look at how you can manage Masthead. In the installer, you're turning it off on sites one by one. We also have PowerShell available so that you can do it globally. And also, as what Peter will talk about next week as he gets into site provisioning, is how you can do that tied into a provisioning flow you might already have within your organization. We'll move on here and we'll take a look and talk about how we can actually work within the Masthead editor. So this is the other side of this. This is when you log into your Masthead editor. This is actually completely outside SharePoint, although you sign in with the same Office 365 credentials. You can specify who in your organization is allowed to manage and work with Masthead. And what we're going to do here is go into edit the navigation. What you're going to see is that we've got the the three zones that you saw in the demo before. In the demo where you saw Masthead, you saw a left-hand navigation zone, a right-hand navigation zone in the footer. This is the visual editor now where you can work with those links. So in our demo, we had three sort of main top-level navigation items. We had the studio, team, and projects. And then on the right-hand side, we had some icon-driven navigation for you as well. So I can work with that all visually here, and just to show you that corresponds here. So we have the 4 and the 3. If I edit the properties now of one of these items, I can go in and control things like, for example, the display. In ours that we're using right now, we're showing links with a text and an icon sitting beside them, but you can also do things like we're doing on the right-hand side where we're showing icon-only navigation. So we give you some choices in visual of how you want to render that out. For the icons, we're using the Font Awesome icon sets. Those aren't images you have to upload. You get thousands of choices out of the box. You can also expand out here, and you can see as I roll over, I could actually reorder these and move these around by dragging and dropping, which I'll show you in a second. And for example, if I want to pick up this, I can actually drag that whole menu above the other, or I can even nest things and move certain items around within a menu or between menus. So give you some great visual customization there to be able to work with your menus and to work with your navigation items, which is really useful, especially when you get into sort of more complex navigation structures. We'll carry on and show you if you want to make a change in Masthead as an example. So I'm going to start again on this page here, showing my Masthead navigation across the top here. We've got our our right-hand zone and our left-hand zone, and you saw from the last screen I was showing you how we've configured that. Right hand right now has drop-downs, left hand does not, and in this demo we'll get into adding some additional drop-down content to Masthead. So right now, for example, in this example we're showing, Teams on the top there is just a link that takes you into a hub site, and then you can use the navigation to drop down within. What I'm going to show you now is how you could use Masthead to go add a drop-down menu to that Teams button there that's on Masthead. So I'm going to copy the URL of one of the sites that I have within my Teams hub. I'm going to go back into Masthead, and I'm going to add a sublink to the Teams menu. When that pops up, I get prompted for a title. I'm going to put it in. Apparently, I've done this demo so many times. Chrome is smart enough to know exactly what I want to type. I'm going to paste that in, and we'll talk about security trimming in a second. You'll see right now it's available to every user. So I've created a text-only link, and I've published that there on Masthead, and that menu item is now added to that. Sorry, that item is now added to the menu. It's not actually going to be live yet on my site until I hit the publish button, which we'll show you in a second. And go ahead and repeat that process. And I'm going to add an additional link to the drop-down menu. Go ahead and hit add here, type in the title. So while I'm just typing here, a few things to point out. The launch behavior would let you control if you want to do a new tab, a new window, that kind of thing. And we talked about the display style as well. And we're going to repeat that process one last time and grab the last item from the hub and put it into the menu. So when this is done, Teams will have a little drop-down menu coming off it that'll let you actually quickly navigate to the site you're looking for instead of having to jump through them, to jump through the links. So I'm gonna go ahead and publish my changes. As I said, this is not live until I publish. When I publish, I have to put in a publication comment for the history just so that we know what's changed. There also is preview functionality that you can wire up. So if you have a specific SharePoint site you want to preview this on, you can go ahead and actually preview before you publish your changes. But because I don't have to deal with change control in our test environment, I'm going to go ahead and publish that straight out. From there, if I move on, now I would actually come in and go over to the SharePoint tab, and if I refresh that page we were looking at before, oops, sorry, apologies on that. There we go. So I'm gonna actually show it to you on a mobile device instead of on a desktop, but you'll see now that on the collapsed screen size, when I open up Masthead, I get that same navigation style we were looking at before, and you'll see that Teams is now a drop-down because I published it out. So when I click on Teams and pop into it, I can actually go ahead and see those sort of drop-down level navigation that we have. Masthead's made to respond no matter what screen size you're on. So we're looking at it on mobile here, but it'll size itself out to a tablet, to a desktop, whatever you're looking at, and sort of use the space in an intelligent way that it has available to it. With Masthead, you can have up to 3 levels of drop-down. So I showed a single level of drop-down there, but you can actually carry on and have up to 3 full levels of drop-down functionality available to you. Last but not least, we're going to look at some of the more advanced features of Masthead. So we've got our browser now that has that Teams dropdown that I was talking about before. So like we had on the mobile, we're now seeing that on the desktop experience. And if I had additional menus, they would fly out from the side there. What we're going to do is set this up so that we take advantage of the security trimming functionality in Masthead. So right now, the way we have it set up is that all of those menu items are available to every user on the SharePoint site that would come in. We might want to use security trimming though to restrict that down. So say that only certain subsets of users have access to certain navigation items. It's important to remember this isn't actual security, it's security by obscurity. If they have access to the URL, they're still gonna be able to get to it. But we can go ahead, come into our Masthead editor here, and then choose from our security groups and restrict, for example, so that only the front-end development team sees the front-end development button. That's gonna be really powerful so that we can not only provide security, but more so provide convenience to our users. We can trim down our navigation to them so that when they come in, they see the stuff that matters to them. That might be based on things like regions. Maybe you have different regional groups that show. This user I'm logged in with here, by the way, will still have access to this because I'm an administrator across. but if I logged in with a different user, that'll show. So I'm going to just switch over in Chrome here to a different user that I had open. And now when I refresh this user will not have access to that navigation item. There we go. So it's only going to see 2 items. So, and that's the power we can do here. As I said, we could do this by region. We could do this maybe by language even. We could do this by department and give people sections of the navigation that are completely tailored to them that only the relevant people will see. So we've done this by creating, for example, department-specific dropdowns for certain departments, branch-specific dropdowns for certain office locations, that kind of thing. Quite powerful and how you can consider it across the board. So we're going to take a look at some of the theming capabilities here. So you'll notice in the demo that I've been using, Masthead's always been that kind of gray color, and that's just because that's what we have set up in our theme. The theme's got 3 different components to it. The first is a logo. So I'm going to go ahead and swap that out to the Masthead logo. Before it was the 3 circles of our IT Groove logo. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background color and make it into this kind of purple color. We've got some accessibility checking there to show you that if you choose a background and foreground color that aren't different enough contrast, we'll show that here. You get a warning telling you that people cannot read that. So try to provide you some guidance and help protect you, make sure that what you're creating is meets the accessibility guidelines that we need to meet. And if I went ahead and publish this out, we'll now see those on the other side. So I'll go ahead and publish this, again, put in a comment. And once that's saved, I'll flip back over in Chrome to the other tab, and you'll see that as I've refreshed, the navigation now has the Masthead logo in the top left-hand corner, and we now have this nice sort of purplish color for our navigation. I'm going to touch on version history a little bit within the product. It's another one of the sort of powerful features. I'm going to flip back over to the Masthead editor, and let's say that I don't want to keep those changes that I just made. I can go ahead and choose the history option here, and I'm going to see all those changes that I've committed, both major and minor versions of my navigation, and I'm going to go ahead and flip back 1 version to get rid of that that color change. So I'm going to open up the version, which brings it back into the editor. I'm going to go ahead and publish it, and now when I save this and go back onto the other tab here and do a refresh, I'm going to see the gray color instead of the purple background, just back to the way we had it before. And last but not least, I'm going to show you the footer functionality. All the navigation zones, including footer, are optional. You don't have to use right, left, or footer. Right now in the demos I've shown, the footer's off. I'm going to turn it on. The footer feature exists because it's a request we get a lot from people that need to have sort of a sticky footer across their organization for some key links or for some key messaging. The footer's a little bit more basic. It lets you create links with obviously with a URL. And lets you put some text in the text zone. So I'm going to create a couple links here. Create one called Home. I'm going to create a link called Forms and Tools. We often use this, as I said, to give people some really key links that you always want available to them. Often those might be things like help and support for the SharePoint portal overall. And then, as I said, a text zone. And often this gets an all rights reserved kind of message or that kind of thing. We'll put a message that says, look, I'm a footer, to make it obvious. And we'll go ahead and publish that. And we'll save that out and flip that over back here and do a quick refresh. And we now have the footer across the bottom there. And the links and the text zone like we talked about. That's sort of the fundamentals behind the product. I also wanted to touch base a little bit on our roadmap and just share with you where we're envisioning taking the product in the next few quarters. So looking in Q2, apologies on that. Looking at Q2 2018, we delivered security trimming. There is apparently animation on that slide, so I'm gonna have to keep doing this. There is, okay, well, apparently that's not gonna fly. Let me just see if I hold that there. Oh, that's too bad. I will just speak to these things instead of showing you the slide deck will be available afterwards. For Q2 2018, we delivered security trimming. Q3 and Q4 2018, what we're working on right now is something I'm very excited about called our developer framework. The developer framework has a couple different parts to it. What it's going to be able to let you do is either customize the entire Masthead experience. So if you don't like the menu styles that we have, if you don't like how we structured our drop downs, you want to do things like dialog boxes, you want to do things like full like mega menu style columns, that kind of stuff. The developer framework will let you take the data you're getting back from Masthead and then render it in a completely rearranged, a completely changed way. Second part to the developer framework is the ability to create widgets. And those might be things like maybe a weather widget that shows the weather in your current location, or a widget that shows a breadcrumb trail of where you are on the site. With Masthead, we have this, let's call it inch of space that we've applied to all your sites. Masthead works across modern and classic sites. I should have touched on that way before, I apologize. And we've done the hard work and heavy lifting for you on working with Microsoft frameworks to make that possible. You can then leverage that inch of space to do with what you want. And that's really the power behind the developer framework. So creating widgets. And last but not least is creating actions. So by default, our buttons, when you click, take you to a page, they navigate you to a URL. Custom actions will let you navigate or perform a different actions, maybe launch a modal, do something like that. I think we have a question that came out that might be relevant here. Sorry, Karen, just pulling it up here on our side.
Okay, so we have a question from Mark Campbell, and he's asking, is there a concern that with the sweet bar, the masthead navigation, hub navigation, and site navigation, that there's too much navigation? Mm-hmm. Seems to take up about 40% of the screen area.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's a very, so the question, just to make sure everybody heard, was, is it too much navigation with the sweet bar, the hub site nav, masthead, the site nav, all that? Short answer to that is I definitely took this to an extreme to show for the purposes of the demo, so that, you know, we could make the point that you do have all these different navigation available to you. There are organizations where we actually are using all of that, and even though it does take up a big chunk of the top, as soon as you scroll, it all collapses up. So there hasn't been too much of an issue there. But yes, definitely would highly recommend giving some serious thought to how you're applying that navigation. If you're using hub site navigation, potentially using left-hand navigation for the site. And we've actually written some application customizers with the new SharePoint development framework that often collapse parts of the UX. For example, on an intranet, you don't actually need that big banner that SharePoint gives you. You might want to collapse that. So definitely considerations there, but a very, very valid point to raise. I'll flip back to the developer framework for a second here. Will be three other sort of key things we'll be doing is supporting multiple navigations in one tenancy. So that you can have, right now with security trimming, you can tailor the navigation to a user. We'll be supporting entirely different navigations across the tenancy. We'll be bringing in import and export functionality as well for moving between Masthead tenancies. So if you have a development tenancy and a production tenancy, being able to import and export your navigation across. If you're interested in learning more, definitely visit us at masthead365.com. We have our blog at itgroupstudios.com. On the Masthead side of things, if you're interested in trying the product, either you can book a demo with us through the site, or you can also go ahead and sign yourself up. We don't do a 30-day free trial. What we do is there's an unlimited trial on one site. So you can sign up, set up Masthead. We have an installer that walks you all through it, get it set up in hopefully in a development tenancy or in your real tenancy if that's not possible. And it's free to use on one site to try it out for as long as you want. As soon as you try to put it on the second site is when you'll have to activate your subscription. Other key thing here, pricing we haven't touched on too much, but Masthead for up to 5,000 users is $1,000 a year, Canadian, or you can also do it as $100 a month, and all that information is available on our website. Definitely make sure you check out the other webinars in this series, and I will turn it over to Peter to give you a little teaser and preview of what's ahead next week.
Awesome, thanks Alec. That was a great session. Learned a few tips myself as well, so that's been good. Peter Carson here. I'm the president of Extranet User Manager and a SharePoint MVP. I'm going to be speaking next Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time on site provisioning and integration with Masthead navigation. So let me just take you through a quick teaser of what we've got coming up from that point of view. Alec, I'm also a big fan of this group's. I use it in a lot of my sessions, and it really helps to illustrate the concept of how all these different things that live within Office 365 relate to each other. And really what my session is talking about is how do you put some governance around that, that you've got, all these awesome productivity tools from Microsoft, but, self-service and just letting everybody do their own thing is a little bit scary for a lot of organizations. So what we've done is we've open sourced out a suite of different tools that uses Power Apps to provide a form for people to ask for new groups, new teams, new sites, and then there's a workflow and some PowerShell that basically provisions that out. And what we've done is we've actually integrated that in with Masthead. We've been using Masthead ourselves for some time now, and Alex provided us some PowerShell that allows us to make it part of this process that Masthead gets provisioned onto sites from there. But what I'd like to do is share a little bit of the teaser of what we're doing with Alex's team from a developer framework point of view. So we're in an early sort of beta program. This is an example of a team site that we've got out of the box that we put our Masthead navigation onto, but everything else is plain vanilla out of the site. What we want to do is tweak and change that a little bit to say, okay, well, we're going to keep the site logo on the left there, but we want to add our company logo, not just up where the Office 365 is. Actually, that's a new tidbit I didn't realize. Alec, we're going to have to drop ours in as part of that, but also to add some new features into that top banner area. So one of the key ones, as Alec mentioned, was that there often still needs to be a hierarchy of sites. Yes, Microsoft is pushing everybody to create top-level site collections, but there's still a hierarchy to that. The site collections maybe have a parent concept. So part of our provisioning process is to maintain that parent hierarchy so that ultimately we can build out a rich breadcrumb like we see here and be able to click it at any point through there. And the sales site, the partner site, the IT group site, those are all modern team sites and Office 365 groups. So they're really all at the same level from a hierarchy point of view. They don't live underneath each other. But we maintain that hierarchy virtually within our provisioning list so that we can illustrate to people that are using the site, where does what I'm working on right now relate to the rest of the organization. So you've got your top level nav provided by Masthead, and then your breadcrumb giving you a sense of where am I right now. The other thing we can do is pull in a search box. Right now it's set as a search this site. The plan is to add a little drop down to that to say, okay, let's add some better search functionality in there. Going to office.com for search. There's some great search experiences that people aren't aware of, but we can make that part of the banner. That makes the site that much richer again as part of that as well. So I don't want to take up any more time, give away any more teasers, but I wanted to give you a quick sense of what we've got coming up. Everybody who's registered for the webinar today is automatically registered for mine next Tuesday and Tygraph's on the Thursday as well. So look forward to having everybody join next Tuesday, as I mentioned, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Alec, I'll hand it back to you for final wrap up from there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Peter. Just want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to attend. Hopefully you walked away with some good information. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions that you didn't have a chance to ask here, or if you're interested in learning more. And let's tune back in. I'm looking forward to it myself. September 18th, next Tuesday, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. That will be 10 to 11 Pacific for Peter's presentation. Thanks so much, guys, and have a wonderful day.